we have the three leaders in the industry when it comes to decentralized exchange. Will Warren from 0x, Loy Liu from Kyber, and Hayden Adams from Uniswap, and Sean Adams from Bankless Mythos Capital. Writes a great Bankless newsletter. Is going to take it away and grill these guys on how their protocols work and how they're ultimately going to eat into the centralized exchange market so that we don't have to trust those pesky exchanges from last night. Take it away, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. It is great to be with you. This is a panel on DEX Appeal. Gentlemen, can you hear me right now?
I can.
Yeah.
Perfect. It's great to have you.
Me too.
Hayden, we've got Loy, we've got Will Warren. I feel like I am on a panel right now with the three founding fathers of the DEX movement. So it's like Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe here. So I'm excited to dig in here. Where I want to start, I think, is there's been a lot of conversation in the conference so far about centralized exchanges. And they do a lot right now for us. Most people trust a Coinbase. Maybe they trust a Gemini or a Binance. But what is the case for the DEX? Why do we need them? And Hayden, maybe I'll start with you and get your take.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, the case for DEX is basically the same as the case for like decentralized blockchains in general. I think it does for trading what Bitcoin did for value transfer, right? So it's about transparency, and it's about censorship resistance. It's about like removing central points of failure. All right, so you see these centralized exchanges, and they're always getting hacked. They're always down for maintenance. They're always, censoring users and removing tokens and all these different things. And so for me, decentralized trading is about kind of coming back from that and saying, maybe we should have a system that's sort of more robust and allows more people to participate. I think that's something that's interesting for decentralized exchange is also, decentralized finance. One thing we're trying to do here in the Ethereum world, at least, is build a decentralized financial system. And an important component of that is trading. And I think that another decentralized protocol, another decentralized application can't depend on a centralized one. And so you need decentralized applications to kind of support other decentralized protocols.
Yeah, that's a great point. Loy, I want to bring you into the conversation here. So Hayden makes the point that if we don't have decentralized trading, if we don't have that as a verb in the DeFi stack, it really becomes a central point of failure. Do you agree with that? And what would you add? Why else are DEXs important?
Right. So I think I totally agree with what Hayden just said, and I think that was also like the point that I wanted to bring up as well. I think decentralized finance, they just they are not just compatible with centralized exchanges. That's why we need decentralized exchanges, and especially the one that run fully on chain to work with other decentralized protocols. And I think it's not just about like censorship resistance. It's just about like technical compatibility, right? Like smart contract need to talk to other smart contract. They cannot talk to other centralized servers.
So yeah, and I guess Will, building off of that, we're talking about this term decentralized finance and decentralization in general, and of course that is a loaded term, right? There's certainly a spectrum when it comes to decentralization. What does decentralization mean to you? So Loy was talking about, it's not just censorship resistance, it's also composability, the ability to program on top of these things. Is that something that's important to the stack? And what else would you add? What about the term decentralization is important here?
So I definitely agree that censorship resistance is one of the kind of important ingredients in decentralization. And the other is permissionlessness. So having like a market that is accessible to anyone in the world, no matter who they are, geographically, where they're located, regardless of anything. It's just open to everyone universally. And I think like another really cool aspect of permissionlessness is the ability to have composable smart contract systems. Like anyone can go and build a really cool thing and plug it into Uniswap or Kyber, and it just works, and they don't need to get permission from Hayden or Loy. And so, I think like composability is another kind of important piece of what decentralization provides.
So, Will, we've had these two sort of experiments going on in the decentralized exchange space. I would say one of those experiments is kind of the order book model, which 0x really pioneered. The other is the more automated market maker model that Uniswap pioneered as well, and Kyber to some degree too. Can you talk about the differences between those models? Do they complement each other? Do they compete with one another? What's your take on that, Will?
Well, I mean, I think something that's changed, like something that has really shifted the entire DEX space in the last year, and has like changed my perspective on this, has been DEX aggregation. So being able to like take a big order and just break it up and route it to like the liquidity source with the best price. And I think, all three of us have dedicated a big portion of our life to the projects we're working on. And I think we're all really passionate about, the technical reasons why our solutions are really strong. But I do think that now it's become clear that they are complementary, and when usage is being driven to wherever, whatever solution provides the best price, it's better for end users. And I think they're really just kind of complementary. I would add, I think like, I think they're like almost like different kind of strategies for providing liquidity, really.
So maybe Loy, could you dig into this a little bit for us? So what are the pros and cons of an automated market maker style approach versus a order book approach? What is one better at than the other, and what are kind of the trade-offs?
Right. So I think before I answer that question, I just want to add a little bit about what we support at Kyber. So we do have support a variant of automated market making, something similar to Uniswap. But at the same time, we a large portion of our liquidity comes from the professional market makers as well. Via the form of it's not automated. It's so we call it Fed price reserve. So basically, we have like we have professional market makers. They manually they update the price frequently, and they bring liquidity on chain, and they run fully on the smart contract. So that is somewhat similar to the market makers on 0x is doing on their relays. But here on Kyber they do it fully on chain, right? And we are fully aware of the trade-off between the order book model and also like the automated market making model. I think I can start with a couple of points, and I'm sure that later on Hayden and Will they can add more. I think first of all for the AMM model, it's very easy to bootstrap, right? The users, they just need like to provide the inventory, set up the parameters, and that's it. And they don't have to worry about updating the price and things like that. It's just very simple. Send your inventory, click and deploy the smart contract, and that's it. But the trade-off here is that for the AMM model, you really need like a large amount of inventory in order to support reasonable liquidity, right? Like for example, if you want to trade something like 100 ETH of DAI, and you don't want to see something like 5% of slippage, you really need like a few million USD worth of inventory. But on the order book model, where the market makers they can have a lot of control, they can utilize the inventory much better, right? So they can set up all the price level, and they don't need like a few million US dollar worth of inventory in order to support that 108 order of die. But I think on the flip side, the order book model will require someone like professional market makers to provide much better liquidity before the mass adoption of DEX.
Hayden, I know you have a take on this too. Just bringing you into this topic. Anything you want to touch on the differences here?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first I'll echo Will. I do agree that they can kind of benefit from each other. I mean, 0x and Kyber have both integrated Uniswap, and so some of the liquidity kind of moves between them. I'll say that, and also, a lot of what Loy touched on, which is that, at the moment, so there's like, how are AMMs right now and how do they compare? And then maybe how will they compare further in the future? I'll say that AMMs are like a much more of like a nascent technology. They're a lot newer, whereas order books have been studied for a really long time. So right now, definitely, order books tend to be a little bit more like capital efficient, especially less slippage for larger trades. And this is because liquidity providers have more control over the amount of tokens that they sell at any specific price. And I think that AMMs, you have a little bit less control over because you're all kind of sharing one curve, at least in current implementations. I'm very excited for kind of future experimentation in AMMs that start to give more control to liquidity providers and kind of see how they start to compare further in the future. And so that's something that I'm personally really excited on, and that's what I'm working on basically full time, dedicating my life to. But yeah, I'd say that what Loy said also about just kind of a higher degree of sophistication required right now for liquidity providers on order books versus AMMs. So AMMs, you can kind of have people like, it's very like a passive user experience for liquidity providers. And so anyone can do it. And order books are sort of more sophisticated, more competitive. I do wonder how that will change as AMMs become more capital efficient, and as they allow more customization, they might start to get more competitive, and they might require a little bit more sophistication. But in as the trade-off, they might become more capital efficient.
So we've got order books and we've got AMMs that we've been talking about. And Hayden, I want to stick with you for a minute because what we're also seeing is the advent of new types of AMMs. So we're seeing AMMs like Curve that maybe specialize in stable coins. We're seeing AMMs like Balancer emerge. And many others. Some of the differences, at least in my perception, are also adjustments to sort of the curve that they use. You mentioned the word curve. Can you talk about this landscape? It appears to me like we've got these AMMs that they're almost like I don't know if you guys have ever seen the robot wars, right? Where people kind of build a robot and then like they battle them like battle bots. Used to watch that show as a kid, but it feels like all of these AMMs are almost battle bots with different components. One has a chainsaw, the other has some kind of a blowtorch, and they're all fighting for liquidity. Is that your take too, Hayden? How are the new AMMs different than Uniswap, and how might they compete in different niches?
I think funny enough, they're all very, very similar to Uniswap at the moment. They're all like optimized around very specific, Balancer may be a little bit more general. You can do more tokens in a pool. Curve is essentially, Uniswap leveraged up, right? You're selling more tokens on the way up. So Uniswap, all it does is it sells on the way up and it buys on the way down. And that kind of keeps you 50-50 balance. Curve basically does the same thing, but it sells more tokens on the way up. So the curve just moves up a little bit slower. And so the trade-off there is basically if there's a long-term permanent price divergence, then if you sold more as the token was rising, and then that token kept rising, then obviously you have less of that token as it's rising, and so you lose more value. And so right now, Curve is optimized like heavily around stablecoin to stablecoin pairs only, because if there's a permanent price divergence, you actually end up losing a lot more. So all Curve is basically like something kind of like Uniswap, but hyper optimized around like a very specific use case. Balancer does kind of have a little bit more generalizability. They're kind of going for this sort of ETF, like 5 tokens in a pool that's kind of all rebalancing together. I think that's interesting, definitely from like a sort of a liquidity provider's perspective, but it starts to look very different from maybe what, a market maker on a traditional exchange or like a traditional order book type thing would feel, where like on an order book, you kind of have this sort of 2-token model. And as you start to go beyond 2 tokens, it starts to feel very different. And, a trade between 2 tokens affects the price of a third or a fourth. And so it starts to look very different. But what I'm very excited for is kind of more customizability on like a per user basis, as opposed to kind of customizing an entire curve around one specific use case. And so that's something that I'm very interested in sort of future experimentation on.
Yeah, so talk more about that. Is that like Uniswap v3 or something?
I feel like V2 should be out for like a few weeks before I talk too much about V3. But definitely, it's something we want to experiment with.
I feel like all these awesome innovations are coming in DeFi because everyone's just stuck at home, with coronavirus and just able to actually plug away on stuff. So maybe that's an accelerant here. Will, want to jump back to you with this question. So when you think about the users of DEXs in general, or even 0x specifically, who are they? Like, what's the profile today? Are these retail folks? Are you seeing some institutions kind of dip a toe in the water? Are these folks who would use Coinbase? I've seen estimates for the total DeFi users at 150K or so, and maybe that's generous. So who are the users here, Will?
Most volume, based on the data that we've seen, is driven by arbitrage bots. So it is people that are finding pricing inefficiencies between different models and basically trying to capture that spread, and that drives a lot of volume. And arbitrage bots don't, that volume isn't necessarily unhealthy. Like arbitrage makes markets more efficient. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that a lot of DEX volume is currently made up of our bots. Outside of that, I think like we have, the super early, super Ethereum enthusiast people that are like interested in tokens and like they just think this stuff is amazing and they can't get enough of it and they just want to try everything. It's not mainstream users, and I think there are some like power users probably, especially around like I think like margin trading, for example, like DYDX, I think they drive a ton of volume, but they have like a pretty small number of users that are driving it. Whereas with Uniswap and Kyber, there's a lot of volume, but a lot of the trades are smaller trades being driven by many people, like many smaller trades, many people driving them. So I don't know. It's hard to know. It's going to change a lot anyway. Like every 6 months, we're going to have like new waves of users coming in. So it's really hard to know like what that profile will look like in the future.
So Loy, how do we get there? So how do we 10x our user base? How do we 100x our user base?
I think this is, there's no like single answer for this question, right? I think we all have to try to improve our protocol and make it easy for everyone to use. And one of the things that Kyber has been doing is, trying to integrate with a lot more dApp so that the users, they can use decentralized changes without even knowing it. So I think like I can just give you a couple of numbers. I think like this time around last year, the volume coming from the dApps integration was around like 10% of Kyber volume, right? But currently I think it accounts for almost 40%. So I think we see a lot of growth in terms of volume coming from the integration, right? And at Kyber, we also have the Kyber Swap platform that is for the retail users, right? If they want to use if they want to experience decentralized chains, they can go to Kyber Swap. And one of the things that the Kyber Swap team has been doing to get more users is, it's actually very simple. So they go to conferences, for example, and they give what is similar to a voucher, like a coupon, right? And then the users, they can go to Kyber Swap, they can enter the code there, and they can claim like $3 or $5 of US dollar. But in order to claim that, they have to go through the entire experience of decentralized chains, right? So they, so we managed to get more users from that activities, and hopefully a few of them will stick around. So I think it's gonna be a lot of action together in order to get more and more users to use decentralized chains.
Yeah, great answer, Lloyd. So Hayden, I was complaining on Twitter earlier this week that Coinbase listed MKR token, but they didn't list DAI, or they didn't list an ETH pair or DAI pair with it. And you jumped in and you said, "Why do we need Coinbase?" because on Uniswap, there's lower slippage, and we're doing 5x the volume. But a lot of people look at the decentralized, and that, by the way, that was a pretty baller tweet there. But a lot of people look at the decentralized exchange market, and it's 1 to 3% maybe of the centralized exchange market. My question to you is, can DEXs beat centralized exchanges?
Yeah, I mean, first off, it was 5x on Uniswap V1 and 7x on V2 that day. But so I guess the point is that right now, centralized exchanges overall do a lot more USD volume than decentralized exchanges. And the reason is because, most of what's being traded is centralized assets. And so, for fiat pairs, then, you have to go on Coinbase. You have to go on a centralized exchange. For on Ethereum, though, for ETH to ERC20 pairs or ERC20 to ERC20 pairs, suddenly you have a new avenue. And for those, we're actually seeing that, decentralized platforms like Uniswap and Kyber and 0x are actually beating centralized platforms on a lot of, common pairs. For things like Bitcoin pairs, it's a little bit more in the middle ground, where right now it's very difficult to kind of have decentralized Bitcoin on a smart contract platform. And so, that's still on fiat pairs. But I think really, the more value that moves on chain, the more value that moves onto Ethereum, the more that, the more of an advantage that DEX will have over centralized exchanges.
I see you nodding your head, Will. Are stablecoins part of that? Are they an important ingredient? Because it's not quite fiat. Now it's tokenized. And I know you recently said, Will, all forms of value will end up tokenized and on public blockchains. Are stablecoins our friend there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They're an analog to fiat that, is stored in a database somewhere in whatever the kind of federal issuer of that currency stores it. Now you have it on a blockchain, which is great. But yeah, I agree with Hayden that the fiat on off ramps, that is a moat that you cannot decentralize easily, or at all. And really, for DAI, so DAI is a blockchain native asset. And we started off this conversation talking about what is the use case for DEXs as a whole. I think we discussed the properties of decentralization that are important, so permissionless and censorship resistance. And then I think the other value proposition for DEXs are just blockchain native assets, assets that why would you even deposit them onto a centralized exchange and trade them? You can literally just do it right now from your wallet. It's more work to go and use a centralized exchange. And so DAI is a perfect example of that. And then, all of these other assets that are blockchain native on Ethereum as well, like Augur markets that, should be launching soon. And all these different NFTs like Unisocks, all of these things, you don't need Coinbase to list them. And they don't really have an incentive to do it anyway. So you're just going to end up using DEXs for those things.
So the growth will really come from this long tail of crypto native, crypto exclusive assets then, and not necessarily from the traditional assets that we see today. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Loy, another thing that people have talked about is holding DEXs back has been the idea of scalability. And I see two dimensions of scalability. One is scalability of liquidity, right? The other is transactions per second on chain. Are we making progress? I mean, we've talked a lot about liquidity and that, but how about transactions per second? Are we making progress on that front with rollups, layer 2, that sort of thing? How optimistic are you about optimistic rollups?
I think it's good that a lot of teams are doing experiment with layer 2 scalability technology, right? And yeah, even at Kyber, we also have a small team looking at it. And we also trying a bunch of different approaches to see which one fits the best. But I think at the moment the main challenge is how to make it easy and seamless for the users, right? To use any layer 2 solution. And I think Wolf just mentioned earlier, there are not many retail users at the moment. And now if we ask them like to move to layer 2, we introduce another barrier, right? And I think we are going to lose a lot of them along the way. So I think scalability is important. Layer 2 is a very good approach, but we just need like to do it like carefully. Otherwise, it's going to be Hayden, Will, and myself and a few others on layer 2. Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to get there, and I think my prediction is that in the future, layer 1 is mainly for the large value trade or transactions. Something like if you do something like 1,000 USD trade, you don't care if you are paying like $1 or $2 transaction gas, right? But if you do something like $50 trade, you probably want to move to layer 2 and do it there. And you may do like a lot of them, and after a while you just move back to layer 1.
So high economic density trades on the base layer. Hayden, I used Unipig back a few months ago, and I was kind of blown away that MetaMask worked on this. For those that don't know, this is a roll up that was created with Uniswap, kind of in the middle. Is that our best shot at scaling this out? Like the Ethereum community is all about rollups these days. Do we just scale this whole thing with a DeFi rollup?
I think that the rollup hype is real for sure. We built that, the Unipig experiment in collaboration with what was, formerly Plasma Group, but now they're called Optimism. And I'll say that, in order for the thing that excites me about optimistic rollup is that, for kind of in order to, it's kind of what Loy said, but it can't feel like this like separate world, a separate system. And you have to kind of like migrate, like you have to like, deposit in here, and then you have to watch it, and then you have to exit here. And then like moving between applications is this whole process. It has to feel like Ethereum feels today, which means you need like general smart contracts. They need to be able to talk to each other. They need to be able to interoperate with each other. And optimistic rollup definitely is like the first layer 2 solution that I've seen that feels like it really hits on a lot of those points, where you can like deploy multiple, Solidity smart contracts onto one, and then they'll talk to each other directly, and have this sort of native interoperability. So I am very bullish on optimistic rollup. I think that for one to win, it shouldn't involve like, each individual application shouldn't have this huge burden on them to build out this huge amount of infrastructure around it. I think that like for a layer 2 solution to win, it has to feel like Ethereum, where there's like this kind of this one chain, and like anyone can kind of just put their smart contracts on it, and it feels like Ethereum, and they can all talk to each other. And no one else, and like I don't need to build this insane like huge like infrastructure around it to make an app work.
Yeah, great point. Absolutely. I want to shift gears and talk for a minute about tokens again, but this time your tokens. So each of you have sort of a token associated with your protocol. Uniswap, not quite, but it does have a governance function that has been added in V2. Maybe because we'll start with you, Hayden. Can we talk about governance surface area? How much governance surface area should a DeFi protocol have? I get the sense that Uniswap is going with as light as possible. Why are you doing that?
Yeah, for me, it's definitely as little as needed, or maybe exactly the amount that you absolutely need is the amount of governance that probably makes sense. I think that something to be really conscious of. It was something when I started working on Uniswap, it was like how do we make these applications have the same properties as Ethereum itself, where people can kind of know they can rely. If you have tokens in your wallet, you can always rely on them being there. You always kind of know that you can send them to someone else. And as you kind of start to introduce governance systems, depending on what those governance systems can do, some of those properties start to go away. Where now maybe like 51% of some token can choose to take all your money. And so I think it's just really important. I'm not like anti-token. I'm not anti-token governance necessarily. I think that like the entire world right now runs on token governance. I think stocks are basically token governance. So I'm not against it, but I think that it's, when you're building kind of projects that are meant to be decentralized and like, where people are putting money in them, I think that, it's important to be extremely careful there. A lot of, I sort of, when I was first, a lot of people have said like, oh, you should have had some sort of upgradable governance in Uniswap V1. And then we just released V2 and without even announcing a release date ahead of time. And almost, half the liquidity has already migrated over in about 10 days. And so kind of, that's a form of governance, right? That's like Ethereum's form of governance, where, you release a new version and people have to kind of opt into the new version, right? It's almost like a hard fork. And so there are kind of trade-offs there where there is like a kind of some overhead on migrating. But the sort of trade-off for that has been that like, I don't have the ability to steal everyone's funds in Uniswap for this entire period of time, which is kind of the entire point of Uniswap. But I don't know, I think it's a fairly, I like minimized governance.
Yeah, totally get that take. Minimum viable governance. Now, I know Loy and Will, you guys have both thought about governance a lot for your respective protocols. Will, maybe I want to start with you. So 0x has rolled out some governance features, additional like liquidity, sort of incentive mechanisms. Can you talk a little bit about why those governance features are important, why you decided to go in the route that you did, and maybe respond a little bit to what are the merits of having a bit more governance in a protocol?
Definitely. Yeah. So back when writing the white paper and creating the first kind of prototypes of the system, it became clear that, well, first of all, our thesis was like, all right, everything's going to be tokenized, and like the amount of value moving through these pipelines of smart contracts, it's going to be enormous. Like we're talking about like billions and billions of dollars. It's going to be an entirely new financial system that is being routed through smart contracts. And from our perspective, we were building on Ethereum, and it was still quite early. It was super primitive. Like the developer tooling was super primitive. Just everything about Ethereum was super in its infancy and changing all the time. And for us, it was apparent that like anything we build on here is going to be like pretty much irrelevant very quickly. And there are going to be new token standards. There are going to be like new types of functionality added to the EVM. There are going to be, tons of new use cases that we haven't even thought about. And if this system is going to be responsible for, pumping billions of dollars through it and people are relying on it, well, it's going to have to be upgradable. It's going to have to be able to like keep pace with Ethereum itself in terms of, supporting new community standards and supporting like, innovation lower in the stack. But it's also going to have to like, governance over that, artery that's just like pumping billions of dollars through it. That is going to be extremely important as well. And yeah, we also went through the exercise of evaluating the trade-offs of, is it even worth trying to, incorporate governance into the system? And we came to the conclusion that yes, it is. And I still do think that that it's worth it on a case-by-case basis. I think like right now, today, the things that are the things that we're seeing built in DeFi and in the Ethereum space are still like very, very tiny in the scheme of things. And like, 5 years from now, like what if Uniswap contains like billions of dollars in a single liquidity pool? And, there are thousands and thousands of people that have all deposited into it, and kind of coordinating an upgrade, it's just going to be not, it's going to be very challenging. And so our thought process was like, okay, governance over the smart contracts themselves super important, and upgradability super important. And then separately, aside from like technical governance, there's the question of governance over financial resources. So how does a project that is intended to be open, like a public good, how does that sustain itself long term? And from our, we thought there needs to be a community treasury, and the community needs to be able to allocate those resources how they see fit. And so that was another big reason why governance was important for us, is to be able to get to the point where this thing could sustain itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand that take and that perspective. I'm glad you guys are pursuing that. And Loy, I want to bring you into this too. And I want to ask one additional question after this. So if you're able to answer in about a minute, that would be awesome. So your take on governance, and in particular, some of the advantages that Will mentioned, you guys with the KNC token are making it sort of a fee generation, a revenue generation, a cash flow token. And we are down to the final minute, so maybe I won't get that last question, but go for it. Why is governance good for KNC?
Yeah, I think we when we started the project, we didn't really think about having the governance features there, because we thought that it's just too early for us to do anything, right? Like literally, like I think not many people really like care about the project back then, and we didn't really have a big ecosystem to think about it yet. And with Kyber, I think in the last 2 years, we have made a lot of progress. We have built, I think, one of the biggest ecosystem in the space, in the Ethereum space, and we realized that now it's important for us to really have some sort of like decentralized governance features built in to really manage the project, because from time to time we have a lot of like people who come in and who ask questions like, why don't you support the other asset? Why don't you like increase the fees you collected in the network? Why don't you like burn more token and things like that? So now we realize that we have built something that is worth governing. So why not like decentralize it, right? Like why not give the control to the KNC holders? So that's why we by the end of June we are going to launch what we call Kyber DAO. It's going to be the decentralized governance for Kyber.
Fantastic, gentlemen. I think that's all we have time for. This has been a great panel. You guys are doing great work. Very bullish on the future of DEXs. Ryan, back to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, guys.
I didn't even have to play you guys off. Thank you. Running right on time.
Thanks, Ryan.